and welcome to the France 24 debate tonight. After Donald Trump scored more victories in the latest round of primaries, scoring wins in North Korea, in Illinois and crucially in Florida, we're asking, is he now unstoppable in his bid to become the Republican nominee? And indeed, to become the next US president? And what, if anything, can the GOP establishment do to stop him? Joining me to discuss all this and more, let's introduce you to some of tonight's panel. With me in the studio, Jean-Éric Brunard. He's a US politics specialist, a professor at Paris 2 University, and also author of a book in English entitled Who Wants to Destroy the Republican Party? The Astonishing Donald Trump. That's just been published in English, I believe. Thank you very much indeed for being with us here in the studio. Also joining us by satellite from Washington, D.C., we've got Dan Hazelwood. He's a Republican strategist and the president of Targeted Creative Communications, a political analyst there in Washington. Thank you, sir, as well, for being with us tonight. I would like to invite you all also to join in on Twitter, if you so wish, using the hashtag F24debate, France24 debate. We'll get started for now. We are waiting for some more guests to join us down the line from the US, but lots to talk about already, so we'll get started. First of all, I want to put a question to you, Dan Hazelwood, in Washington. Is Donald Trump now unstoppable, in your opinion?
He's not unstoppable, but he's almost unstoppable from getting the Republican nomination. He's been winning. He famously joked that there'd be so much winning we would be tired of the winning. So that's exactly what's happening. He's got win about half the remaining delegates that are outstanding in the upcoming primaries. He's in a pretty strong position to actually achieve that goal. So while it's not impossible to stop him, I think it's pretty clear that he's going to, in all likelihood, be the Republican nominee going into the Republican convention in July.
I mean, how likely is it, in your opinion, that he will be the nominee?
Practically certain.
Okay, would you agree?
99%.
Okay, would you agree with that, Jean-Éric Brunard?
Yeah, with all what you said, Dan, I'm very surprised you said only nearly to 100%. I would say 120% is going to be unstoppable and going to be the next nominee of the Republican Party for sure.
There are some, though, in the Republican establishment who are thinking of trying to take this to convention, holding a contested or brokered convention in Cleveland in July, hoping that they can prevent Donald Trump from getting enough delegates to make this go to convention, not give him automatically the nomination. Is that merely wishful thinking, do you believe?
Actually, I would put things differently. You can say the rule is that it is possible, but you heard Donald Trump, who said today that he warned that maybe there are going to be riots if he's not going to be the nominee, because if you've got such a big amount of delegates that he should be chosen the delegate. For him, it's a question of being a fair game. What he says from the beginning, he says, I'm playing the game, but I want to be treated justly. I want fairness in this game. And actually, the question is that maybe that's not that fair, because the establishment maybe could play a trick on him. So that's the big problem. And all the supporters of Donald Trump could turn violent, or could decide at the least not to go and vote. That the least they could do, but that would put in danger the Republican candidacy.
Yeah, it would be a huge risk, wouldn't it, Dan Hazelwood, both politically and in terms of security? What do you think of Donald Trump's remarks that there would be riots if he didn't get the Republican presidential nomination?
Well, I think practically speaking, that riots are an overblown reaction to what would happen. I do agree that the political ramifications of denying him the nomination when he was the #1 vote getter would be very severe. And he got, there's been several million people who've cast their votes or will cast their votes for Donald Trump before this nomination, before we get to July. And those million of people are going to be awfully angry, not necessarily to riot, but they're not going to want to go out and support whoever the Republicans pick in their stead. So I'm not worried about physical violence, but the political damage to the party would be quite significant. There's no doubt about that. Some people will argue that the political damage of that fight is less than the long-term damage of nominating Donald Trump, and that's how they're trying to justify this position in their mind. But again, it's still an awfully hard thing to achieve. You have to have you have to have a lot of things go right, and you have to have a lot of mistakes being made by a lot of people to even have the opportunity to do that. And I really don't think it's probable.
Nevertheless, he didn't win in Ohio on Tuesday night. 66 delegates there instead went to John Kasich, a winner-takes-all state there. And that will drag out this process a little more. So it still is mathematically possible, although you're saying it would be too damaging as a strategy, too risky.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that are mathematically possible. It's mathematically possible that I could enter the Olympics and win a gold medal, but it is very improbable.
I hope you'll let us know when you do that. We'd love to watch.
Yeah, well, I'll come back for an interview if I succeed. But so practically speaking, Ohio, John Kasich won, but John Kasich is much further back, and Ted Cruz, the movement conservative, is the one who's positioned to, if anybody is, he's the one who's positioned next to defeat Donald Trump. And if this goes to a convention fight, it's likely not to be John Kasich. The people who attend the Republican conventions, the people who, if this goes to several ballots, tend to be people who are movement conservatives, people who've been working for decades, the people who helped Ronald Reagan come to power. I mean, there's a convention delegate I know who was actually the youngest elected delegate in 1964, and he's going to be a delegate this coming July. You know, these people have been around for a long time. They're not the establishment John Kasich types. A lot of them are movement conservatives, and they'll move to Ted Cruz, and he's the one who has the opportunity, probably, if there is a contested convention, to be the upset winner. But again, we're all speculating about something that's very unlikely.
Yeah, indeed. I just want to ask you about that particular question of Ted Cruz, Jean-Éric Brana. I mean, he's a very divisive figure in himself, isn't it now? And is he, do you think, going to be adopted by members of the Republican Party establishment as any alternative to Donald Trump?
Well, I doubt that, really. I don't think that may happen. It's exactly at the other side of the political spectrum, so it's hardly something that may happen. I just like to react to something that has been said before, because, of course, if you consider mathematics to talk about the convention, you can have many possibilities. But something that you have to keep in mind is that the first row would be, of course, settled if Donald Trump hasn't got the magic number of 1237. But at the second row, most of the delegates, or actually a big part of them, will be free to decide. And out of this number, we can presume that some of them will vote for Donald Trump. And because if Donald Trump failed to reach the magic number, it would be very close to this number. And when Dan said those people are highly involved in politics for a long time, it depends what state you considered. For example, I was in Tennessee 3 weeks ago at the time of the election, and I met some of them. They were totally new on the list, out of these 300 delegates who were elected on that day, because in Tennessee they were directly elected by the voters. So it's so complicated because the rules are so different from one state to another. It is something that has to be made very clear. According to those different rules also, some will be tied for not only the second row, sometimes the third or the fourth row. So that's highly improbable for me that Donald Trump would fail at the convention, even if it doesn't reach the magic number at the end.
Yeah, it's a good point you raise here about the complicated nature of this selection process. We can bring up now the latest delegate count in the light of Tuesday night's primary votes and see how many delegates indeed each candidate has there. You can see Donald Trump 661, Ted Cruz 406, and John Kasich 142. And the magic number there is 1,237. That's the amount that a Republican nominee needs to get in order to automatically clinch the nomination. I want to bring in at this stage as well Patrick Brady. He's a former chairman of the Illinois Republican Party and the founder of the Next Generation Strategies. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. What do you make of Donald Trump's win in Illinois? I mean, is he now in an insurmountable position?
Oh, no, it's not even close to that. Last night, the big development was that he lost in Ohio. He lost to Governor Kasich. That kind of stopped his momentum. Had he won Florida and Ohio, he probably would have rolled to the nomination. Now that he's been slowed down in Ohio. We've got states coming up now that are much more favorable to Governor Kasich and to Senator Cruz. So I think what's going to happen here over the next 8 weeks is you're going to see a delegate fight, hand-to-hand combat for delegates, and then we're going to have an open convention in June. So for the first time in a long, long time, we're going to have a contested convention.
All right, very different view from what we've been hearing so far in the debate. Very interesting. Do you believe then that coming from so far behind, John Kasich could still have a chance of getting the nomination here?
Oh, yeah. What you need to do, or what the candidates need to do, Senator Cruz and Governor Kasich, is just make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get to 1,237 so he would get the nomination on the first vote. Right now, Donald Trump has to get 60% of the remaining delegates. There's over 1,000 delegates that still haven't been allocated, and that's an almost impossible number for him to achieve. So the likelihood of it going, I think, to an open convention is great. And then there'll be delegates like me for Governor Kasich and Senator Cruz's delegates, and we'll have a series of votes until we pick a nominee. But this is far from a done deal for Donald Trump.
All right, far from a done deal. Let's put that back to Dan Hazelwood. I mean, clearly you were saying earlier that it might be mathematically possible, but it looks very unlikely. What do you make of the statement that it's far from a done deal now?
I respect Pat, and I've known him a little bit for a while, and I get what he's saying, and a lot of people want that to be true, but we're looking at Arizona on Tuesday coming up, and that's, I believe, a winner-take-all state, and it looks likely Donald Trump's going to win that. If we had a contest that a week ago or 2 weeks ago had become either Kasich versus Trump or a Cruz versus Trump, then you could start to see, then Pat's case starts to have a lot more merit. But we're looking at still being fractured. John Kasich's not going to leave the race. There's supporters like Pat who are strong. I mean, and I've known Kasich for a couple of decades now, and he's a good man. His supporters don't want him to leave. Ted Cruz, he thinks he's the movement conservative, and conservatives are rallying to him. So he's not likely to step out of this. And so those two are going to go forward. That's going to continue to split the anti-Trump vote. And we're going to go state by state, and it's becomes very difficult to stop him in this process. Like I said, Trump only needs slightly more than half the remaining delegates, and he's on track to starting to get them in a bunch of places. So it would be a great spectacle for what Pat describes. I just still think it's very, very improbable.
All right, let me bring in at this point, we're also joined from Philadelphia by Michael Johns, who's the co-founder of the National Tea Party Movement, the president of the Tea Party community, and a former White House speechwriter. Michael Johns, thank you very much for being with us as well on the France 24 debate. What do you make of these arguments? We're talking about the possibility that Donald Trump, nothing can stop him now. Would you go along with that?
I would say that if this were not a man named Donald Trump, and if it were another candidate in this place, we almost certainly would not be having this discussion. The fact that there exists such tension right now between the establishment GOP and Trump is why it is a consideration. But Trump is clearly leading considerably in this. I'm very optimistic he's going to meet the threshold for nomination. And, if you look at the sort of coming primaries, just in the next 30 days, with the exception of maybe Utah, I mean, it's very difficult to even identify one that Cruz, who in my judgment is really the only singular threat to Trump, is going to prevail in. And certainly once you get to New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, these are states where Trump is going to do hugely well, in my view.
And how worried are you about the split that we've been seeing, that you've identified there between the Republican Party establishment and Donald Trump and his supporters? It's not very destructive?
I think it's just a product of the political reality that the Republican establishment, predominantly Washington, D.C. based and donor based, has drifted away from the grassroots that's ultimately the foundation of the party. I think, and certainly if you heard what Mr. Trump said last night, I think he's presenting an interest in unifying, but that unification it can't come at the expense of the agenda and the policy priorities that he's put forward, and particularly as it relates to trade and border security and immigration issues. I mean, these are really at the forefront of the mindset, particularly of the American middle class right now. And I think it's really up to the GOP establishment, to the Republican establishment, to come closer to the grassroots and vice versa.
Okay, well, let me bring on this Patrick Brady, who's the former chairman of the Illinois Republican Party. Is it now for the Republican establishment to make the running and move closer to Donald Trump rather than look at ways in which that he could be defeated and trying to get another candidate to get the nomination?
Well, I've never understood this. I've been walking precincts since 1968, this divide, or this so-called divide between establishment and Tea Party and whatever name you want to go. I've always been a conservative Republican and believed in conservative principles. And Donald Trump in no way represents the conservative principles that were the foundation of the party in 1980 when we had so much success with Ronald Reagan. If you really look at his policies, if you really look at his history in the business world, if you really look at what he said about women, Hispanics, veterans, he's insulted virtually every group that you want to seek out to have vote for you. I go, this is just not the guy, as much as I agree with my Tea Party friend that the party probably needs, in a certain respect, to get back to the fundamentals of limited government, a strong national defense, and things along those lines. To throw this over to a guy like Donald Trump, who in my state, the state of Illinois, gave over $100,000 to the people that I fight against every day. I just don't think that Donald Trump is the right answer. And we have two other candidates, and Senator Cruz and Governor Kasich, who actually are real Republicans, real conservatives, and real proven result getters, not just a guy who came from reality television and now wants to walk into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Very quick reaction to that, Michael Johns, before we go to a break. Donald Trump's just a guy from reality television.
The unfortunate reality is that the positions that Trump has been putting forward, the policy positions that he's putting forward, are entirely consistent with the tradition of American conservatism. They are being distorted by his opponents and by his enemies, but he's got a very great tax plan that's going to cut rates across the board. Border security, deportations are consistent with the agenda. Clearly, he's stated his position on defunding Planned Parenthood, which is important to social conservatives, all conservatives, and his foreign policy of eradicating ISIS, strengthening the American military, and essentially restoring American sense of self-assuredness and purpose in the world are all entirely consistent with conservatism. And frankly, the people that are labeling him not conservative are those that have not really been aligned with conservatism over the last 3 decades anyway.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. I'm afraid we're taking a very quick break. We'll be back with the latest news and then the rest of the France 24 debate in just a few minutes.